Welcome to the shadowy corners of Rosewood, a town where time stands still and legends linger in the whispering wind. Tonight, we delve into the heart of darkness hidden within an old, forgotten estate, an inheritance that carries with it a chilling secret. Inheriting a grand but eerie old house, Sarah Mitchell thought she was simply taking on a family legacy. Little did she know, within its walls lay a mirror of unimaginable power and malevolence. From the moment Sarah cleans the mirror's grimy surface, she's thrust into a world where reality distorts, shadows whisper secrets, and the boundary between the known and the unknown blurs. Haunted by visions, plagued by unexplainable occurrences, and drawn into a nightmarish realm, Sarah must confront the darkness that the mirror has unleashed. But as she digs deeper into its history, she discovers that some legends are darker and more dangerous than she ever imagined. Join us as we unravel the chilling tale of The Reflection, a story where the boundaries between fear and reality are shattered, and the darkness within the mirror comes alive. Make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the full story. Dive into the darkness with us. And remember, some reflections are best left unseen. The town of Rosewood had always been shrouded in an air of quiet mystery. Nestled between ancient woods and rolling hills, it was a place where time seemed to move at its own leisurely pace, and whispers of old legends drifted on the wind like the leaves of the surrounding forests. For generations, the townsfolk spoke in hushed tones about the Mitchell House, a grand, dilapidated estate that had stood at the edge of town since the early 19th century. It was said that something malevolent lingered within its decaying walls, an unsettling presence that defied explanation. Sarah Mitchell had never paid much heed to the stories. Raised in the shadow of the old house, she had always seen it as a relic of her family's past, a haunting reminder of the lives lived and lost within its crumbling structure. When her grandmother passed away and left her the estate, Sarah viewed it as little more than a burden, a property to be dealt with, not a vessel of darkness. As she moved into the house, Sarah felt a mixture of nostalgia and dread. The grandiose rooms were now cloaked in dust, and the once majestic furnishings were worn and faded. It was a house suspended in a bygone era, its silence punctuated only by the creaking of floorboards and the occasional rustle of wind through broken windows. Sarah set to work, determined to restore the house to some semblance of its former glory, unaware that she was about to awaken something that had lain dormant for decades. It wasn't long before Sarah stumbled upon the mirror. Hidden away in a forgotten corner of the attic, the mirror was an ornate, antique piece with intricate carvings that seemed to shift and dance in the dim light. Its glass was smeared with grime and age, but Sarah felt an inexplicable pull towards it. The mirror was undeniably beautiful, but there was something unsettling about it, something that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. From the moment she cleaned its surface, strange things began to happen. Objects in the house seemed to move on their own, and shadows flickered in the periphery of her vision. Whispers, barely audible, seemed to emanate from the mirror, a haunting murmur that seemed to beckon her closer. Sarah brushed off the disturbances as the product of an overactive imagination and the stress of moving into a new home. But as the days passed, the incidents grew more frequent and more disturbing. The mirror seemed to take on a life of its own, its reflection warping and distorting reality in ways that defied logic. Sarah began to experience unsettling visions and nightmares that left her shaken and disoriented. The once familiar comfort of her home was now infused with a palpable sense of dread. The deeper Sarah delved into the history of the mirror and the house, the more she uncovered about the sinister force that lurked within its depths. The stories of Edmund Blackwood, the reclusive artist who had once owned the mirror, painted a picture of a man consumed by dark obsessions and forbidden knowledge. The more Sarah learned, the more she realized that the mirror was not merely a relic of the past, but a gateway to something far more terrifying. Now, as Sarah stands on the precipice of understanding, she is drawn into a nightmarish struggle against forces beyond her comprehension. The mirror, once a mere object of curiosity, has become a conduit for entities that thrive on fear and despair. Sarah's battle to uncover the truth and contain the dark presence will test her sanity and resolve. leading her down a path fraught with peril and the unknown. In the shadowed corners of Rosewood, the old house waits, its secrets poised to reveal themselves. As Sarah's journey unfolds, she will discover that some legends are rooted in truth, and some forces are best left undisturbed. Chapter 1. Homecoming. The summer sun was setting over Rosewood, casting a warm, golden glow over the small town nestled in the rolling hills. Sarah Mitchell drove through the familiar streets, her heart heavy with a mix of nostalgia and unease. The town hadn't changed much in the 4 years she'd been away at college, yet everything felt different now. The vibrant flowers in front yards were still in bloom, and the old elm trees still lined the streets, but the quietude seemed almost oppressive, as if the town was holding its breath. Her grandmother's house stood at the edge of town, a grand Victorian structure that had seen better days. It was a relic of a bygone era, its once stately facade now worn by years of neglect. Ivy climbed up the sides of the house, and the paint was peeling in places, but it still retained a certain dignified charm. As Sarah pulled up the driveway, the sight of the house brought back a flood of childhood memories, both comforting and bittersweet. Sarah parked her car and took a deep breath before stepping out. The warm, musty smell of the house greeted her as she opened the front door. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the faint aroma of old wood. The house was cluttered with the remnants of a life well lived: photographs, antique furniture, and stacks of old newspapers. Martha Mitchell, her grandmother, was seated in her favorite armchair by the window, wrapped in a knitted blanket. Her once vibrant eyes were now dimmed by age and illness, but when she saw Sarah, a flicker of recognition and joy sparked in her eyes. "Sarah, my dear," Martha said weakly, extending a frail hand. "You've grown up so much." Sarah hugged her grandmother gently, her own eyes brimming with tears. "I've missed you, Grandma." Over the next few days, Sarah settled into the house, taking on the task of sorting through the clutter. It was a task both physically and emotionally draining. The house was filled with memories of family gatherings, holidays, and quiet afternoons. As Sarah worked, she found herself lost in thought, reminiscing about the days when life had seemed simpler. The house was not entirely deserted. Neighbors and old friends stopped by to offer their condolences and catch up with Sarah. They spoke of the changes in town and shared stories about her grandmother. It was during these conversations that Sarah began to pick up on subtle hints about the house's history. Strange occurrences, whispered warnings, and the occasional nervous glance when the conversation turned to certain topics. One neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, mentioned in hushed tones, "You know, there's always been something a bit off about this house. Just strange noises at night, and that old mirror upstairs. People used to say it's not just an ordinary mirror." Sarah nodded, but didn't delve into the subject. She was too focused on the task at hand. Still, Mrs. Thompson's words lingered in her mind, adding a layer of unease to the task of sorting through the family belongings. Chapter 2. The Attic Discovery. The attic was a world unto itself, a labyrinth of old trunks, dusty furniture, and forgotten relics. Sarah had always been intrigued by the attic when she was a child, but it had been years since she had ventured up there. The narrow staircase creaked under her weight as she ascended, the air growing colder with each step. When Sarah finally reached the attic, she was met with a scene of disarray. Boxes and bags were stacked haphazardly, and cobwebs hung from the exposed rafters. In the far corner, partially covered by a large moth-eaten sheet, was an object that caught her eye: a large, ornate mirror. Curiosity piqued, Sarah pulled the sheet away, revealing the mirror in its entirety. The frame was intricately carved with floral patterns and vines, its wood darkened with age. The glass was clouded and dusty, but as Sarah wiped it clean, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. The moment the glass cleared, Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The reflection in the mirror was not an exact replica of the attic she was standing in. Instead, it showed a room that seemed to be a distorted version of her own. The colors were muted, the shadows darker, and the furniture was arranged in an unsettling manner. Sarah took a step back, her heart pounding. She rubbed her eyes, thinking the dust or her fatigue might be playing tricks on her. But when she looked again, the distorted room remained. It was as if the mirror was showing a parallel version of the space, a realm that was both familiar and profoundly alien. She glanced around the attic, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling. The mirror's reflection seemed to move subtly, as though it had a life of its own. Strange shapes and shadows flickered at the edges of the glass, creating an eerie atmosphere that made Sarah's skin crawl. Determined to get to the bottom of it, Sarah decided to keep the mirror in the attic for now. She would investigate further once she had the time and energy. For the moment, she had more pressing concerns, like sorting through the rest of the house and caring for her grandmother. But as the days passed, the mirror continued to haunt her thoughts. The strange reflection, the whispers from the townsfolk, and her grandmother's cryptic warning combined to create a sense of unease that Sarah couldn't ignore. She knew that she had stumbled upon something far more mysterious and unsettling than she had anticipated. Chapter 3: Strange Happenings. Sarah's first few nights in the house were unsettling. As she tried to settle into a routine, small but eerie occurrences began to disrupt her peace. It started with the occasional creak of floorboards or the rustling of curtains, which she initially brushed off as the house settling. But as the days passed, the disturbances grew more pronounced. One evening, while Sarah was organizing a stack of old letters in the living room, she noticed a shadow darting across the room. It was a fleeting movement, but it made her heart race. She turned quickly, but the room was empty. The shadow had vanished, leaving no trace. The feeling of being watched grew stronger, and Sarah couldn't shake the sensation that someone, or something, was observing her. The disturbances didn't stop there. Objects seemed to move on their own. Sarah found a picture frame on the floor that she was sure had been on the mantle. The lamp beside her bed flickered on and off intermittently. Every time she turned around to check, everything appeared normal again. The unsettling occurrences were subtle but persistent, making Sarah question her own sanity. Despite her grandmother's warnings, Sarah's curiosity about the mirror grew stronger. She found herself drawn to it more and more. The mirror's reflection seemed to beckon her, offering glimpses of a reality that was both mesmerizing and terrifying. Determined to learn more, Sarah decided to speak with the townsfolk. She visited the local diner, where many of Rosewood's residents gathered. Over coffee and pie, she casually brought up the mirror and asked if anyone knew anything about it. Mrs. Thompson, the elderly neighbor who had mentioned the mirror before, was the first to speak up. "Ah, the old mirror. I remember it well. It was always said to be cursed. There were stories about people who went missing after looking into it too long." Sarah listened intently as Mrs. Thompson recounted tales of strange occurrences and mysterious disappearances linked to the mirror. The stories varied, but a common thread ran through them. The mirror was associated with the occult and dark forces. Another local, Mr. Hargrove, mentioned Edmund Blackwood, the reclusive artist who had once owned the mirror. Blackwood was a strange fellow, he said. He kept to himself and was rumored to dabble in dark arts. Some say he vanished because he was involved in something he couldn't control. The more Sarah learned, the more intrigued she became. The townsfolk stories painted a picture of the mirror as an object of dark power, but they were often vague and contradictory. Sarah couldn't ignore the sense that there was a deeper, more sinister truth behind these tales. Sarah's sense of normalcy was shattered as the days went by. At first, the small disturbances seemed like coincidences. She'd find items misplaced or feel sudden, inexplicable chills. But these occurrences grew more frequent and eerie. One morning, Sarah found the attic door wide open, though she was certain she had closed it the night before. The mirror's reflection seemed to be the focal point of these disturbances, casting strange and unsettling shadows. One evening, while Sarah was working in the kitchen, she heard a loud crash from the attic. Rushing upstairs, she found nothing out of place except for a strange, cold breeze that seemed to emanate from the mirror. Her heart raced as she glanced at the distorted reflection, where shadowy figures seemed to flicker and move just beyond the glass. Despite her growing fear, Sarah couldn't look away. She began to experience vivid, disorienting dreams. In these dreams, the mirror became a gateway to a nightmarish landscape filled with twisted, writhing shapes and disembodied whispers. Sarah would wake up in a cold sweat, unable to shake the feeling that something was watching her from the mirror mirror's depths. Determined to understand what was happening, Sarah visited the local diner and spoke with the town's elderly residents. She learned more about Edmund Blackwood, the artist who had owned the mirror. According to the locals, Blackwood was known for his obsession with the occult and had performed mysterious rituals in his home. The town's collective memory of Blackwood was tinged with fear and suspicion, but concrete details were sparse. Mrs. Thompson's stories were the most unsettling. She recounted how some townsfolk had reported seeing strange apparitions and hearing whispers from the old Mitchell house. Her eyes darted nervously as she spoke, and Sarah couldn't ignore the feeling that the town was hiding something. Chapter 4. Delving into history. Sarah's investigation took her to the Rosewood Public Library, a quaint building with tall shelves and the musty smell of old books. She sought out the librarian, Mrs. Carr, who had been with the library for decades and had a wealth of knowledge about the town's history. Mrs. Carr pointed Sarah to a section of local history and occult studies. Among the dusty tomes and yellowed documents, Sarah found references to Edmund Blackwood and his enigmatic art. Blackwood was known for his unsettling paintings, which depicted surreal and nightmarish scenes. One book, Legends and Lore of Rosewood, mentioned Blackwood's disappearance in hushed tones. According to the book, Blackwood had been working on a series of occult paintings that were rumored to involve ancient rituals. The book suggested that Blackwood had been consumed by the very forces he sought to control, leading to his mysterious vanishing. Sarah also discovered a collection of newspaper clippings about the mirror's history. The article spoke of its origins as a decorative piece and its later association with Blackwood. The stories were filled with speculation, but lacked concrete details about the mirror's true nature. Her research led her to an elderly historian, Dr. Albert Sinclair, who had studied the occult and the history of Rosewood. Sarah arranged an interview with him, hoping he could shed more light on the mirror's dark past. Dr. Sinclair was a thin, wiry man with a penchant for old-fashioned clothing and a grave demeanor. When Sarah mentioned the mirror, his eyes grew serious. The mirror, he said. It is said to be a conduit to another realm, a place where the boundaries between reality and the supernatural are blurred. Dr. Sinclair explained that the mirror was believed to be part of a ritualistic practice intended to summon entities from a parallel dimension. The entities were said to be malevolent, feeding on fear and despair. The ritual had been conducted by an occult group that had vanished without a trace. The mirror's power lies in its ability to reflect not just physical appearances, but the deepest fears and desires of those who look into it, Dr. Sinclair explained. It acts as a gateway, drawing entities from the other side into our world. The library was a sanctuary for Sarah, a place where she could escape the growing dread of the mirror. Mrs. Carr, the librarian, guided her to the section on local history and the occult. Sarah pored over old newspapers and books, searching for clues about Blackwood and the mirror. One book, Dark Legends of Rosewood, offered a chilling account of Blackwood's disappearance. It described how he had become increasingly reclusive and obsessed with his work. The book hinted at a ritual involving a mirror that was believed to summon otherworldly entities. The mirror was said to be a vessel through which these entities could enter the world. Dr. Albert Sinclair, the elderly historian, proved to be a valuable resource. Sarah visited him in his study, which was filled with ancient tomes and occult artifacts. Dr. Sinclair explained that the mirror was not merely a decorative piece, but a powerful tool used in dark rituals. The entities summoned through the mirror were said to feed on human fear and despair, using their victims' emotions to strengthen their hold on the physical world. Dr. Sinclair also revealed that Blackwood's disappearance was linked to the mirror's power. According to local lore, Blackwood had attempted to control the entities, but had become trapped in the other realm. His disappearance was attributed to his failed attempt to harness the mirror's dark forces. Chapter 5. The Other Realm. As Sarah continued to study the mirror, its influence over her grew stronger. The reflections in the mirror became increasingly disturbing. The distorted room she saw was now populated with unsettling figures, shadows that seemed to move with a will of their own. One evening, as Sarah gazed into the mirror, she saw a figure that looked eerily like herself, but with a twisted, malevolent expression. The figure in the reflection seemed to be watching her, its eyes filled with an unsettling hunger. Sarah's heart raced, and she pulled away from the mirror, but the image lingered in her mind. The presence of entities from the other realm became more palpable. Sarah started to experience vivid, nightmarish visions, which left her feeling disoriented and frightened. She would see fleeting images of dark, twisted landscapes and hear whispers that seemed to come from within the mirror. Sarah's isolation grew as the mirror's influence intensified. Her friends and family noticed the change in her behavior and expressed their concern. They tried to reach out, but Sarah was consumed by her obsession with the mirror. She found solace only in the eerie reflections and the enigmatic presence that seemed to beckon her from beyond. The mirror's impact on her life became all-encompassing. She spent hours staring into its depths, trying to decipher the messages and images that appeared. Her once close relationships began to suffer as she withdrew into herself, lost in the haunting allure of the mirror's realm. Despite the growing concerns of those around her, Sarah felt compelled to explore the mirror's mysteries further. She was determined to uncover the truth behind its dark power, even if it meant delving into the heart of her own fears. As Sarah continued to study the mirror, she began to see more disturbing visions. The reflection was no longer just a distorted version of reality. It seemed to show an alternate dimension. The room within the mirror was a grotesque parody of her own home, filled with strange, shifting shadows and eerie figures. The boundary between Sarah's world and the other realm began to blur. She started to experience phenomena that seemed to defy explanation. The temperature in the house fluctuated wildly, and strange noises echoed through the walls. Sarah felt as though the entities were trying to make contact, their presence growing more intrusive and aggressive. Isolation took a toll on Sarah's mental state. Her friends and family noticed the change in her behavior and expressed concern, but Sarah was too consumed by the mirror's influence to listen. She became increasingly withdrawn, unable to focus on anything other than the mirror's dark mysteries. Conversations with loved ones turned into arguments, and Sarah's relationships began to deteriorate. Sarah's obsession with the mirror deepened. She spent hours in front of it, trying to decipher the messages and images it revealed. The mirror's reflection seemed to respond to her emotions, showing her deepest fears and anxieties. The entities appeared more tangible, their presence a constant, suffocating pressure. Chapter 6: Voices and Shadows. Sarah's obsession with the mirror reached new heights as she found herself increasingly drawn into its eerie allure. The distortions in the reflection grew more pronounced, and the entities within the mirror became more active. The once faint whispers now evolved into distinct voices, murmuring in a language that was both foreign and hauntingly familiar. The mirror's power seemed to seep into every aspect of Sarah's life. She started hearing the voices even when she wasn't in front of the mirror, their chilling whispers echoing in the corners of her mind. They seemed to be calling her name, urging her to return to the mirror's depths. Each time she looked into the mirror, the voices grew louder and more insistent, as if they were trying to communicate something crucial. One night, Sarah woke to find herself in the attic, staring blankly at the mirror. She had no recollection of how she got there, and the room was shrouded in an unnatural darkness. The figures in the mirror seemed to be moving more freely, their forms shifting and swirling with malevolent intent. It was as if they were trying to break through the barrier between the realms. Sarah's nightmares became more vivid and disturbing. She dreamed of being trapped in a twisted version of her own home, with shadowy figures lurking around every corner. The nightmares left her feeling drained and anxious, and she struggled to distinguish between dreams and reality. Her isolation from the outside world deepened. Friends and family tried to reach out, but Sarah was too consumed by her fixation on the mirror. Conversations with them became strained, as she was unable to focus on anything other than the mirror's dark mysteries. The few friends who did visit were unnerved by the palpable sense of dread that seemed to hang over the house. One evening, Sarah noticed that the mirror's surface had begun to ripple as if it were liquid. The distortions in the reflection became more pronounced, showing scenes of a nightmarish realm where twisted, grotesque figures roamed. The mirror seemed to pulse with a strange energy, and the shadows in the reflection took on a life of their own. Sarah decided to document her experiences in a journal, She wrote about the voices, the figures, and the unsettling visions she had seen. The act of writing provided a small measure of relief, but it also served as a reminder of the growing influence the mirror had over her. The voices Sarah heard from the mirror became clearer and more insistent. They spoke in a haunting, rhythmic chant that seemed to reverberate through her mind. The voices were both alluring and terrifying, promising knowledge and power while threatening her sanity. Sarah's dreams grew more intense. She found herself wandering through a labyrinthine version of her home, where the walls seemed to shift and warp. The shadows in her dreams took on a malevolent quality, and the entities from the mirror seemed to follow her, whispering dark secrets. One night, Sarah woke up to find the attic door ajar again. She felt an overwhelming compulsion to go upstairs. When she reached the attic, she was met with an unsettling sight. The mirror's surface was covered in a thick, black mist, and the figures within it were more defined and threatening than ever before. The air was heavy with an oppressive energy, and Sarah felt an icy hand brush against her cheek. Desperate for answers, Sarah decided to perform a personal investigation. She set up cameras and recording equipment to capture any unusual activity. The footage revealed strange anomalies, objects moving on their own, fleeting shadows, and inexplicable fluctuations in temperature. The recordings provided eerie evidence of the mirror's influence, but they also deepened Sarah's sense of dread. Chapter 7. Seeking help. Desperate for answers and feeling overwhelmed by the mirror's influence, Sarah reached out to Dr. Albert Sinclair once again. She explained the escalation of her experiences and the increasing intensity of the mirror's power. Dr. Sinclair listened intently, his face growing grave as she spoke. "This is more serious than I thought," Dr. Sinclair said. "The mirror is acting as a conduit, and the entities are becoming more assertive. You're not just seeing them, they're trying to make contact. We need to take immediate action." Dr. Sinclair suggested that Sarah perform a ritual to contain the mirror's power. The ritual was designed to seal the gateway and prevent the entities from crossing over into their world. It involved ancient symbols, incantations, and specific actions to neutralize the mirror's influence. Sarah agreed to proceed with the ritual, but she knew it wouldn't be easy. She enlisted the help of her few remaining friends, who were willing to assist despite their fear and uncertainty. They gathered the necessary items for the ritual and prepared for the night when it would take place. As the night of the ritual approached, the atmosphere in the house grew increasingly tense. The mirror's power seemed to surge, causing more frequent and intense disturbances. Shadows moved with a restless energy, and the voices became more frantic and demanding. It was clear that the entities were aware of the impending ritual and were determined to resist it. Sarah's desperation drove her to contact Dr. Sinclair again. She explained the escalation of the mirror's influence and the disturbing phenomena she had witnessed. Dr. Sinclair listened carefully, his expression growing more concerned. "The mirror's power is beyond our understanding," Dr. Sinclair said. "What you're experiencing is a manifestation of the entity's attempts to break through the barrier. We need to act quickly to contain them." Dr. Sinclair suggested that Sarah perform a ritual to neutralize the mirror's influence. He provided detailed instructions for the ritual, which involved drawing ancient symbols around the mirror and reciting specific incantations. The ritual was intended to seal the gateway and prevent the entities from crossing into their world. Sarah enlisted the help of her remaining friends, who were willing to assist despite their fear. They gathered the necessary items and prepared for the ritual, but the atmosphere was fraught with tension. The mirror's power seemed to intensify as the ritual approached, and the entities became more active and aggressive. Chapter 8. Ritual Preparations. Sarah and her friends set up for the ritual in the attic, where the mirror was located. They arranged candles in a circle around the mirror and placed the necessary symbols and artifacts at specific points. The air was thick with anticipation and anxiety as they prepared to confront the dark forces that had taken hold of the mirror. Dr. Sinclair led the group in reciting ancient incantations and performing the ritual's preparatory steps. The ritual required precise timing and coordination, and everyone had to stay focused and committed to the task. As they began the ritual, the mirror's influence became more pronounced. The reflections in the mirror grew more chaotic, with figures moving violently and shadows swirling erratically. The entities seemed to sense the disruption and fought back with a fierce intensity. The room was filled with a palpable sense of dread as the group struggled to maintain their focus. The mirror's power seemed to intensify, creating a whirlwind of dark energy that threatened to overwhelm them. Despite their efforts, it was clear that the entities were not going to give up easily. The attic was transformed into a ritual space. Candles were arranged in a circle around the mirror, and symbols were drawn on the floor and walls. Sarah's friends worked diligently to set up the ritual, but the eerie presence of the mirror cast a dark shadow over their preparations. As they prepared, the disturbances in the house became more pronounced. Shadows moved with a restless energy, and the air grew cold and heavy. The entities seemed to sense the ritual and fought back with increasing fervor. The whispers grew louder, and the mirror's reflection became more chaotic. The ritual required precise timing and coordination. Sarah and her friends practiced the incantations and movements, but the pressure of the mirror's influence weighed heavily on them. The atmosphere in the attic was charged with fear and anticipation as they prepared for the critical phase of the ritual. Chapter 9. The ritual begins. The ritual reached its critical phase, and the tension in the attic was almost unbearable. Sarah and her friends continued to recite the incantations, but the mirror's power was unrelenting. The reflections in the mirror became increasingly distorted, and the entities within it grew more aggressive. As the ritual progressed, the mirror's surface began to ripple and pulse with a dark energy. The figures in the reflection moved with a menacing grace, their eyes fixed on the group with an unsettling hunger. The room was filled with the sounds of whispers and shrieks, creating a cacophony of fear and confusion. Sarah felt the weight of the mirror's power pressing down on her, and she struggled to stay focused on the ritual. The entities seemed to be trying to break through the barrier between the realms, and their presence was becoming more tangible. Shadows reached out from the mirror, and the air grew cold and oppressive. Despite the overwhelming odds, Sarah and her friends persevered. They continued to perform the ritual, their voices rising in intensity as they fought against the dark forces. The room was a battleground of light and darkness, with the mirror at its center. The night of the ritual arrived, and Sarah and her friends gathered in the attic. The room was filled with the flickering light of candles, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The ritual began with the recitation of incantations and the drawing of symbols. As the ritual progressed, the mirror's power surged violently. The reflections in the mirror became increasingly distorted, and the entities within it fought against the containment efforts. Shadows reached out from the mirror, and the air was filled with a sense of impending doom. Sarah and her friends struggled to maintain their focus as the mirror's influence intensified. The figures within the mirror moved with a malevolent energy, and the whispers became frantic and dissonant. The ritual's progress was marked by moments of intense energy and disturbing phenomena. The battle between the two realms reached its climax. The mirror's power pulsed with an ominous force, and the entities seemed to grow more desperate. Sarah felt the weight of the mirror's dark energy pressing down on her, and the room became a battleground of light and darkness. Chapter 10. The final confrontation. The climax of the ritual was both dramatic and harrowing. The mirror's power surged uncontrollably, and the boundary between the realms shattered. Entities from the mirror's realm began to emerge, their forms twisted and grotesque. The attic was engulfed in darkness, and the air was filled with a palpable sense of dread. Sarah faced the leader of the entities, a dark, shadowy figure with a chilling presence. The confrontation was both physical and psychological, as Sarah had to confront her deepest fears and vulnerabilities. The entity's eyes were filled with an ancient malice, and its voice was a haunting whisper that seemed to echo from the depths of the other realm. The battle was fierce and chaotic. The mirror's energy pulsed violently, and the entities fought to resist the ritual's effects. The room was filled with shadows and distortions, and Sarah's friends struggled to maintain their composure. In the final moments of the ritual, Sarah made a desperate effort to complete the incantations. The mirror's power reached its peak, and the struggle between the two realms reached its breaking point. The outcome of the ritual would determine the fate of both worlds. Chapter 11, Aftermath. The resolution of the ritual was both dramatic and ambiguous. The mirror's influence was either banished or partially merged with Sarah's world, depending on the outcome. The attic was left in disarray, and the mirror's fate was uncertain. The town of Rosewood was left to deal with the aftermath. Strange occurrences continued, and the boundaries between realms remained altered. The mirror's legacy was a dark and unsettling reminder of the events that had transpired. Sarah's world was forever changed by the ritual. She had faced the dark forces and emerged with a deeper understanding of the mirror's power. The house stood as a reminder of the events, and the story of the mirror became a chilling legend in Rosewood's folklore. The resolution of the ritual left the attic in disarray. The mirror's surface was shattered, and the room was filled with debris and lingering shadows. The mirror's power seemed to be either banished or partially merged with Sarah's world, depending on the outcome. The town of Rosewood was left to deal with the aftermath of the ritual. Strange occurrences continued, and the boundaries between realms remained altered. The mirror's legacy became a dark and unsettling part of the town's folklore, and the story of Sarah's struggle with the mirror spread through the community. Sarah's life was forever changed by the events. She struggled to reconcile the impact of the mirror's influence on her world and her relationships. The house stood as a reminder of the dark forces that had been unleashed, and Sarah was left with a lingering sense of dread. Chapter 12, Legacy. In the epilogue, Sarah reflects on the impact of the mirror's influence on her life. She contemplates the changes that have taken place and the lingering sense of dread that remains. The mirror's story becomes a part of the town's legend, and its influence continues to cast a shadow over Rosewood.